First, she called me darling. Then she called me dear. Then she learned my name with the kind of smile people wear when they are measuring how much damage they can do with their hands folded neatly in their lap. At the beginning, I thought I had been lucky. My husband loved me openly. He laughed with his whole face. He held doors open, remembered my coffee order, and said my name like it was something he had found and meant to keep. And his mother was exactly the kind of woman who could make a room feel expensive without ever buying anything new. She wore pearls even when no occasion required pearls. She spoke softly, with a voice polished smooth by years of being obeyed. When I met her, she kissed the air near my cheek instead of my skin and said, "You're smaller than I expected." She smiled after that, so if I had been less careful, I might have mistaken it for warmth. I married her son in the middle of spring, when everything looked soft enough to forgive. White flowers. Thin sunlight. A rented hall with too many lights and not enough air. She cried at the ceremony. Everyone saw the tears and said how moved she must be. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief and told me she was losing a son, not gaining a daughter. People laughed gently because they thought it was sentimental. I laughed too. That was the first mistake. In the first few months, she did nothing openly cruel. Cruelty, real cruelty, is often too clumsy in the beginning. It must first dress itself in concern. It must arrive with a casserole, or a warning, or a story about someone else who suffered because they were too trusting. She called my husband every morning. Not always for long. Just long enough to remind him she was there. Just long enough to ask if he had eaten, if he was sleeping, if I was taking care of him properly. The first time I heard her ask that, I was standing in the kitchen with wet hands over the sink. He lowered his voice, nodded, and said, "Yes, Mom." Then he looked at me and smiled apologetically, as though that small surrender did not matter. I told myself it did not matter. Some families were close. Some mothers were involved. Some sons found comfort in old routines. I was new. I would learn the shape of the household, the rhythm of their history, the private language they had built long before I arrived. So I smiled when she corrected the way I cut vegetables. I smiled when she rearranged my shelves. I smiled when she said my apartment looked cozy in a tone that meant temporary, uncertain, not quite enough. The first small thing she stole was my place in a family photo. We had gathered for her birthday at a restaurant with white tablecloths and too much silverware. Everyone leaned in for the picture, and when the waiter came over, she shifted her chair so I was pushed just outside the frame. It was subtle. If I had pointed it out, I would have sounded petty. So I said nothing. She looked at me across the flash of the camera and gave me a look so small it could have been mistaken for accident. Then came the suggestions. Not demands. Suggestions are cleaner. They can be repeated without sounding like instructions. She suggested my husband was working too much. She suggested I was tired often. She suggested his friends had changed since the wedding. She suggested my job made me distant. Each suggestion was a needle. Not enough to bleed at once. Enough to leave a mark if repeated in the same place. My husband tried to defend me at first. He would say, "Mom, that's not fair," in the careful tone people use when they do not want to provoke the very fire they are standing in. And then she would laugh, light and thin, and tell him he was too sensitive because he loved me. That phrase always landed with a little poison inside it. Because love, in her hands, became a weakness. Something childish. Something she intended to outgrow in him. She began inviting him over without me. Just tea. Just lunch. Just a quick visit to help with something in the garage, something with the car, something only a son could do. When he returned, he would be quieter than before. Not angry. Just edited. As if someone had gone through him with small scissors and trimmed away the loose, happy edges. I asked once what they talked about. He kissed my forehead and said, "Nothing important." But I knew better than to trust the words that come after a mother's smile. The first time she lied about me, she did it beautifully. We were all at a family dinner. She had made roast chicken, potatoes, and a pie that looked as if it had been baked in another century. She passed dishes around with such grace that anyone watching would have sworn she was generous by nature. Then, while pouring wine, she said to the table, "I do worry about how overwhelmed she is lately. Poor thing gets defensive so quickly." The room went silent in that polite way rooms do when everyone is deciding whether to notice something cruel. I looked at her. She was not looking at me. She was arranging slices of pie onto plates, as if she had not just cut at my throat with a dessert knife. My husband frowned. "Mom," he said. And she sighed, as if she had merely expressed concern and was now being punished for kindness. "I only mean," she said, "that marriage is hard. Not everyone adjusts at the same pace." There it was. Not an accusation. A frame. She did not need to call me unstable if she could make everyone else wonder whether I was. After dinner, my husband apologized to me in the car. He kept both hands on the steering wheel. His voice was tired. "I know she can be difficult," he said. I stared out the window at the passing lights and said, "You keep saying difficult like it means harmless." He was quiet after that. Silence, when used between people who love each other, can be a bridge. It can also be the first brick in a wall. She noticed when I stopped coming to dinners. She noticed when I stopped answering her calls immediately. She noticed, and instead of confronting me, she learned to work around me. She would say things like, "I didn't want to disturb you," when she called my husband. She would tell him, "I know she's busy," in a voice that made busyness sound like vanity. Then she would ask if he was eating enough, if he was happy, if he had noticed how tired he looked. By the end of each conversation, she had once again positioned herself as the only person who truly cared for him. I watched the pattern growing. It was not dramatic. That was the worst part. She was not slamming doors or shouting in public. She was reordering reality one suggestion at a time. If he came home late from work, she said it was because I distracted him. If I was quiet, she said I was sulking. If I tried to be friendly, she said I was performing. Every road led back to me, and every road came with mud on it. She found my weak point before I even understood I had one. I had grown up with a mother who believed in peace at any price, and that had taught me an ugly lesson. The person who avoids conflict longest is often the person who loses the most. So when she said my husband had seemed restless lately, I did not tell her she was planting doubts. When she said I was too intense about loyalty, I did not ask her why loyalty was a problem. I swallowed everything because I thought swallowing was the same as strength. Then came the night she tried to break us apart for real. It was raining hard enough to blur the streetlights. My husband was in the shower. His phone rang on the counter, once, twice, and then stopped. A minute later it rang again. I looked at the screen. His mother. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the preview of the message. "Call me now. It's about her." Something in my chest went cold. Not fear exactly. Recognition. That peculiar sensation when you realize the shape of the room was always designed with your escape in mind. I answered. She did not say hello. She sounded breathless, upset, almost trembling. "Has he told you?" she asked. I said. Told me what? And then she let out a tiny, terrible pause, the kind that exists only when someone wants to be caught saying the thing they have rehearsed. I didn't want to say anything, she whispered, but I found messages. My fingers tightened around the phone. What messages? I asked. She sounded almost sorry. Almost. The ones he's been deleting, she said. The ones with that woman from his office. For one suspended second, I did not understand. Then the room seemed to tilt. She went on quickly, as if she were helping me pull a thorn from my hand. I only opened his laptop because I was worried about him. I saw enough to know this has been going on for a while. I'm so sorry, honey. I really am. There are lies that sound loud. And there are lies that are wrapped in such care that you feel ashamed for not thanking them. This was the second kind. She had made herself sound like a rescuer. She had even chosen the word sorry, as if sorrow could hide the precision of the blade. I don't believe you, I said. My voice came out flat. She sighed, and I could hear the disappointment in it. Of course not, she said. That's what people always say when they don't want to hear the truth. Then the shower turned off. I heard footsteps in the hall. And she said, suddenly louder, I'm trying to protect you. My husband came into the kitchen wrapped in a towel, hair dripping, confusion on his face. I was still holding his phone. He saw my expression and reached for me instinctively. Who was that? He asked. Before I could answer, his mother repeated through the speaker, Tell her the truth, sweetheart. She deserves to know. The way she said sweetheart was a performance so carefully timed that it almost made me sick. My husband took the phone from my hand and listened. His face changed slowly. Not into guilt. Into anger. Mom, he said very quietly. And I knew from the pressure in that single word that something had already cracked. He asked her to repeat herself. She did. Then she insisted there had been messages, screenshots, proof. She had spoken so confidently that even now, hearing her unravel, I could tell she had believed she could control how this ended. But she had made one mistake. She had forgotten that lies need cooperation. They cannot survive too much light. My husband stared at me after the call ended. There was rain at the window. There was water on his shoulders. There was something old and wounded opening in his face. I never, he began. I know, I said. Because I did know. I knew him well enough to know what had happened before he even said it. She had looked through his things. She had found nothing. So she had invented something because invention was easier than surrender. He sat down at the table and put both hands over his face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was not empty. It was crowded with every small thing she had done to get us here. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. She's been doing this for months, he said. And in that sentence was the first real agreement between us. Not that she was difficult. Not that she was involved. Not that she meant well. That she had been doing this. We checked his laptop. No messages. No woman from the office. No hidden thread. Only the clean, ordinary clutter of his work and bills and half-finished drafts. I watched him scroll through everything with a face that was changing from shock to fury in real time. Not because he had doubted me. Because he now understood what his mother had been willing to do to both of us. The next morning she called 5 times before breakfast. He did not answer. She left a voicemail saying she was hurt that we had misread her concern. Then another saying family should not speak to each other through anger. Then another, quieter, in which she said she hoped I was proud of myself for turning her son against his own mother. That was the sentence that finally changed everything. Because it was the first time she admitted the game out loud. Not concern. Not misunderstanding. A battle. And now that the battlefield had become visible, my husband could no longer pretend he had not been standing on it all along. He blocked her number. Then he unblocked it. Then he blocked it again. Grief does not move in a straight line. It circles what it has lost. He was not only losing his mother. He was losing the idea that she had loved him in a way that was safe. As for me, I kept my voice even. I answered questions carefully. I did not raise my tone when she texted from an unknown number. I did not cry where she could hear about it. I understood, finally, that women like her feed on visible injury. The more desperate you sound, the more righteous they become. So I became difficult in the only way that mattered. I became calm. I documented everything. I saved the calls, the messages, the dates, the times, the exact phrasing of the lies. I learned the value of a quiet, complete record. Because someday, I knew, she would try to rewrite the story again. And then she made her final mistake. She came to our apartment uninvited. She stood in the doorway holding a gift bag with tissue paper tucked neatly at the top, as though she had arrived for a celebration and not a reckoning. Her face was composed. Her lipstick was perfect. There was nothing about her that looked like panic. My husband had gone still beside me. She looked at him first, not me. That was her old habit. She always reached for him as if I were an afterthought standing beside the real object of her love. "Can I come in?" she asked. No apology. No shame. Just the question, asked as though access had never been revoked. My husband said, "No." It was one syllable. Oh, it was the loudest thing I had ever heard him say. Her expression changed, just a fraction. Not to guilt. To calculation. She looked at me then, and I saw the first unmistakable flash of hatred she had ever given me without a mask over it. And for the first time since I had known her, she realized I was not going to fold. I was not going to smooth it over. I was not going to apologize for surviving her. She clutched the gift bag a little tighter. Behind her smile, something brittle and dangerous was beginning to show. And my husband, standing at my side, finally saw it too. He took a breath, then another, and he said, with a calm so complete it almost sounded cruel, "You don't get to do this anymore." The rain had stopped by then. The hallway outside was bright with late afternoon light. She stood there for a moment too long, as if waiting for the old version of us to return and rescue her from the consequences of her own hands. But there are moments when a family changes shape. Not loudly. Not elegantly. Just enough that everyone can feel the new edges. That was one of those moments. She left without coming inside. The gift bag stayed on the floor for an hour before we touched it. Inside was a framed photograph of my husband as a child, maybe 7 years old, standing beside her in a garden. On the back, in her tight, elegant handwriting, she had written, "You will always be mine." My husband turned the frame face down. Then he sat at the table and laughed once, sharply, with no joy in it at all. "She thinks this is love," he said. And I looked at the photograph, at the child who did not yet know how ownership could wear a mother's face, and I felt something in me steady completely. Because she had tried to divide us with whispers. She had tried to poison him with doubt. She had tried to make me small, then unstable, then guilty, then alone. But all she had really done was reveal herself. And once a person is seen clearly, manipulation loses its favorite hiding place. That was the night we stopped being polite about her. That was the night we stopped protecting her image. That was the night my husband finally understood that defending his marriage did not mean betraying his mother. It meant admitting that the woman who raised him had chosen control over love. And somewhere in the silence that followed, I realized something else. She had spent so long trying to break us apart that she had never once imagined what would happen if she failed. She did not fail quietly. Women like that never do. They do not accept a closed door as a conclusion. They treat it like an insult to be answered. At first, she tried the old path. Calls from different numbers. Voicemails that began sweet and ended sharp. Text messages that pretended to be concerned and then, in the same breath, accused me of turning her son into a stranger. Then she switched to performance. She reached out to relatives. She told a version of events in which she was the mother frightened by a marriage moving too fast, the woman who saw warning signs, the one brave enough to speak. She did not lie with blunt force. She lied with concern. That is the kind of lie people repeat for you because it sounds virtuous when they pass it along. By the end of the week, 2 aunts had called. One cousin sent a message that said, gently, that family was complicated and maybe everyone should take a step back. Another relative, one I had met exactly twice, asked whether I might be misunderstanding her intentions. I read every word with a strange calm. The first stab hurts most when you still believe surprise is protection. After that, pain becomes a pattern. Once I recognized the shape of her tactics, I could see them everywhere. My husband wanted to answer everyone. He wanted to explain, to defend, to prove. That instinct had been trained into him from childhood. If his mother spoke, someone had to clarify. If she cried, someone had to comfort her. If she was wounded, then reality itself had to bend around her pain. But now he was seeing the cost of that habit. Every explanation fed her another chance to twist the knife. Every defense gave her new material. So we stopped explaining to people who had already chosen their comfort over the truth. He sent one message to the family group. Not a speech. Not a manifesto. Just a line that said his mother had fabricated a story to damage his marriage, and that anyone who wanted to discuss it could ask him directly rather than repeat rumors. After that, silence spread. Not peace. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is only the sound people make when they do not yet know which side is safer. His father called 2 days later. He was older, quieter, and weary in a way that suggested he had spent years standing beside her storms instead of inside them. He asked to meet for coffee. He said there were things he should have noticed sooner. He said he was sorry. We met him in a small place near the river where the windows were too bright, and the sugar jars sat neatly at each table. He looked older in person than he had on the phone. People do when they are carrying regret for a long time. He did not make excuses for her. That surprised me. Most enablers arrive with their own soft shield, their own careful phrases. He did not. He simply said he had spent years learning to step aside, to wait for the storm to pass, to keep the peace by letting her win small battles until the house itself became hers. Every time I thought it was easier to avoid it, he said, it became worse. He rubbed a thumb along the rim of his cup. I should have protected him, he said, glancing at my husband. I should have protected both of you. My husband stared at the table for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that sounded like something being lifted out of deep water, I needed one of you to choose me before I could choose myself. His father closed his eyes. That was the closest thing to confession I had ever seen in a man who had spent his life avoiding open fire. After that meeting, something shifted. Not all at once. Real change rarely arrives with a fanfare. It comes in small, practical actions. A blocked number. A forwarded email. A refusal to answer the third call in a row. We began documenting everything not because we expected an immediate dramatic ending, but because we had finally accepted that truth, left unwritten, is easy to drown. Screenshots. Call logs. Notes with dates. Small files of reality stored with the patience of people who have learned that memory is not enough when someone is actively trying to rearrange the past. And she noticed. Of course she noticed. People like her survive by sensing resistance the way certain animals sense weather. She escalated almost immediately. First came the crying. Then the anger. Then the righteous outrage, delivered as if she were the one being abandoned. She showed up at his workplace. Not inside. She knew better than to make herself too obvious. She waited outside in the parking lot and intercepted him as he was leaving, her face arranged into grief so perfect it could have been practiced in a mirror. He came home pale with fury. "She told my boss that I hadn't been answering her because I was in trouble," he said. I looked at him. He laughed once, bitterly. "She said she was worried I was being isolated." Then his face hardened. She used the word manipulated. That was the point where the game changed. Because now she had stepped beyond family myths and into public consequence. He documented the encounter. He informed his workplace. He made it clear that his mother was not authorized to speak on his behalf and that if she returned, security should be called. She hated that. What she hated most was not rejection itself. It was being recorded. Being made legible. Manipulators prefer fog. They need the room dim enough to move the furniture without anyone noticing. So she tried one last emotional ambush. She sent me a letter. Real paper. Heavy cream envelope. Her handwriting careful and slanting, as though each line had been chosen to appear delicate instead of dangerous. I opened it alone, at the kitchen table. The letter began with sympathy. It said she knew I had been under stress. It said she could forgive me for misreading her because marriage could make women insecure. Then it turned. She wrote that I had taken her son from her, that I had made him cold, that I was poisoning a bond she had spent a lifetime building. At the bottom she wrote, "You will never be his family the way I am." I sat there for a full minute without moving. No tears. No dramatic reaction. Just a very clean understanding. She was not trying to win him back. She was trying to win the hierarchy. She wanted me to know my place. When he came into the kitchen, I handed him the letter. He read it once. Then again. Then he folded it in half with a very precise motion, like a man putting away something contaminated. "She's not confused," he said. "No," I answered. "She's committed." That was the beginning of the end. Not because she gave up. Because we stopped participating in the story she needed. No more private meetings. No more unanswered voicemail boxes. No more polite apologies for her behavior. No more choosing her comfort over our clarity. She reacted the way wounded pride often does. She spread a new rumor. She implied I had isolated him from the family. She claimed he was not thinking clearly. She told people I was fragile, which is a useful word when you want to make somebody sound breakable without proving any damage. But the thing about repeated lies is that they age badly. The first time, people listen. The second time, they wonder. The third time, they begin to see the pattern. And once a pattern is visible, charm has to work much harder. Aunt by aunt, cousin by cousin, the family began to understand that the story she told always required a villain. And if it was not me, it would be someone else. That was the lesson buried inside her elegance. She needed conflict to feel central. She needed loyalty to feel powerful. She needed her son to remain a boy so she could remain the only one who ever knew best. Months passed. The air around us changed. Not all at once, but enough. We slept better. We laughed again without checking the room for danger first. My husband stopped flinching every time his phone lit up. He stopped calling her back out of obligation. He started saying no without the apology that had once followed it like a shadow. That word became important. No. A word that had spent his whole life being delayed, softened, negotiated away. No to guilt. No to manipulation. No to surprise visits. No to phone calls at midnight disguised as emergencies. It did not make him cruel. It made him adult. There is a difference. Cruelty takes pleasure in refusal. Maturity simply stops opening the door. The last time she tried to speak to me directly, it was outside a grocery store in late autumn. The sky was low and white. People moved around us with carts and bags and the ordinary urgency of errands. She stood near the entrance wearing a dark coat and the expression of a woman who had already decided she was injured. "I just want peace," she said. That was her opening. Always peace. Always the sacred word she used like a blanket over broken glass. I looked at her and felt for the first time no fear at all. Only distance. She had once seemed enormous to me, like weather. Now she looked ordinary. Not harmless. Never harmless. But finite. "You wanted control," I said. Her face tightened. "I wanted what was best for my son." "No," I said quietly. "You wanted to be the center of his life even after he built one without you." She stared at me with a kind of offended disbelief, as though I had spoken a language she did not respect enough to understand. Then she smiled, tiny and cold. "That's what you think," she said. "It's what he thinks too," I answered. That landed. I saw it land. Not because she cared what I thought, but because she had always believed the fight was against me alone. She had never understood that once a marriage survives a deliberate attempt to poison it, the couple inside it changes. We had seen the shape of the wound together. That kind of seeing does something permanent. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a second the mask slipped. I saw exhaustion. Then resentment. Then the desperate need to recover her footing. But I had already stepped away. I did not owe her another minute of my life. I walked to the car. My hands were steady. Behind me, she did not call out. Maybe she realized at last that the old tricks no longer reached me. When I told my husband what had happened, he listened without interrupting. Then he nodded once, slowly. "She tried one more time," he said. "Yes," I answered. "And she failed," he said. I looked at him, and the relief in his face was quiet but real. That was the part she never understood. She thought the opposite of losing was winning. But sometimes the opposite of losing is simply refusing to keep playing. She is still his mother. That truth did not disappear because she behaved badly. Grief does not work that neatly. He still carries the boy she once held. He still remembers good days from before the rot showed itself. But memory is not obedience. Love is not surrender. There are people who mistake access for devotion. There are people who believe that because they gave you life, they may also demand your silence. There are people who will call cruelty concern and control protection and ruin sacrifice if it helps them sleep at night. She was one of them. And for a long time, I almost let her redefine reality in our home. I almost believed that patience was the same as virtue. I almost believed that the nicest version of a lie was still a misunderstanding. But a marriage does not survive on politeness alone. It survives on recognition. On the moment two people stop pretending the smoke is weather. My husband and I did not become stronger because she hurt us. That would be too neat. Too romantic. We became stronger because when the lie finally showed its teeth, we did not look away from each other. We looked at the truth together. And once you do that, someone else's version of your life loses its power. Sometimes I still think of the first dinner, the first smile, the first small correction disguised as kindness. I think of how easy it is at the beginning to mistake refinement for safety. I think of the careful way she said my name, as if she had already decided how to arrange it in her mouth. And then I think of the end. Not a screaming end. Not a dramatic collapse. Just a quiet, final understanding that the woman who tried to break us apart had, instead, revealed exactly what she was willing to become in order to keep control. She regretted it, of course. Not in the way decent people regret harm. Not with repentance. With loss. She regretted that we saw her. She regretted that the son she could once pull by guilt learned how to stand still. She regretted that I no longer flinched. She regretted most of all that the door she tried to force open had finally shut in her face. But regret is not repair. And some doors, once closed with intention, remain closed for a reason. So we built our life in the space she could no longer enter. We made new traditions. We celebrated holidays with less tension and more laughter. We took long drives with the windows down. We learned how quiet a home can feel when no one is inside it trying to divide the people who live there. And sometimes, in that quiet, I remember the woman in the pearls, the one who thought she could arrange our lives like furniture. I remember her soft voice, her perfect smile, her gift bag at the door, her letters, her rumors, her invented wounds. Then I remember my husband saying no. Not politely. Not apologetically. Just no. That was the moment she lost. Not when she was exposed. Not when others stopped believing her. The moment she truly lost was the first moment he chose our life over her control. And once that happened, everything she tried to destroy became exactly what she could no longer touch.